Hey everybody, welcome back to Little Things Are Big Things Education Podcast with T Free and K Dub. We're back here with you in the recovery week, and we're excited to dive deeper into this main big idea with you. And I'm going to give you a heads up. This one's a long one. Dave and I, we go on a few rants, and we got a lot of passion behind this, and it spirals, it goes in and out. We go from how do we make things fun? How do we make things engaging? How do we gamify things? How do we give low barriers of entry like we've always talked about? How do we rally the troops to get them even interested, give them some meaning? We dive in on some grades with what's our current policy? Why do we believe in these things? So you're in for a treat. There's a lot of great information here. Please stick with it. And then Dave closes us out with an amazing story and a challenge, kind of the pandemic plea, if you will, to close us out. So let's get to it.
Hey folks, he's coming to you from Bowling Green, Kentucky with all the energy of his 4 golden retrievers. He's got all sorts of time working with math, tutoring, and doing the challenge day for 3 years on top of that to build the social emotional support in the math classroom. My best friend and an excellent teacher, T Free.
Heyo, and K-Dub's coming to you live from the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Oregon. 11 years of social studies, middle school and high school. He's got 20 years of coaching, pretty much anything and everything you can possibly think of. Also a lover of dogs, my best bud, K-Dub.
Love the dogs. We won't go on that tangent again this time. Thank you for listening to Little Things Are Big Things Education, brought to you by Peak State Mathematics. Do not forget to rate and review us. We'd love to hear from you at littlebiged.com. Please give us those 5 stars. We are working our way into continuing to earn those. It's not grade inflation if it's accurate. T-Free, what's first today? I believe the topic is makeups, right?
I was going to say, how about we talk about grade inflation to start? We're talking about the idea of recovering, right? Like that's kind of our big idea for the week. And gosh, I mean, we can go on so many tangents about this.
Mm-hmm.
And just like, did the kid actually earn the grade? Did we just give them the grade because we don't want to hear from the parents? Can I actually recover if I get a 0 on a test at all the rest of the quarter? If you give me a retake, do I get the points back that I actually understand, or are you only giving me partials? Like, where do we even go with this? So let's start with the idea of grades and all the varieties we've seen, we've participated in, and what we're currently using.
All right. You mind if I go first then?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think the one thing that I was really lucky at starting at Canyon Park is that school was already pretty immersed into rethinking grades, and not only like the whole movement towards standards-based or proficiency-based learning, but also like really thinking about like that math that you just talked about. Like what happens if I get a 0 on an assignment this semester or this trimester or whatever? Like how do I recover, or can I recover from that? Like what's the impact of that in the grade book? Because one of the things, right, like not being a math person, right, that I never look at things through that lens first, but like when someone pointed out my first year of teaching, hey, 0 through 59 is an F, and then every other grade is only like 10% of the scale. That's kind of a wild thing to think about. And so we came up with this rule at our school. It was called the 50% rule. And I still use versions of it today, even though the grade books that we're working with don't always necessarily work for it perfectly. And that is just that the worst a student can do on an assignment is 50%. Because then they have a chance to recover. So there's like little tools and tricks that we might have time to talk about, like trying to like use like the carrot and stick metaphor to like actually get a kid to do the work.
Right.
Like putting it in is missing, and it looks like a 0, but then but then when I actually turn grades in, like bumping it up to 50% and things like that. But do you have anything similar like that that's kind of like a bedrock principle that you don't move off of?
Well, being the math guy that I am, I actually have gone to the point where I use our district's guideline. You have to have 10% of like daily work kind of stuff, a 30% category for quizzes, and then a 60% category for the test. So for me, what I end up doing is The 10% category is like my intro, warm-ups, the exit slips, like that kind of stuff. Like they get a million attempts. It's the first attempt, and most of the time it's just, did you attempt it? Sweet, here's your points. Did you not attempt it? Were you absent? You got to make it up at another moment. Did you do it, like way down the road? Perfect, that still counts, but like you at least did it. Here's your 10 points, right? So for me, as long as you're there, you're engaged, you're there, like that's 10 points. The 30-point category with the quizzes, I call them homework quizzes. And we've talked about this before too, but they've got unlimited attempts on their homework. They can do it late. They can do it on time, right? Like it starts to pile up on them. So I encourage them to do it on time, right? And I give them suggested pacing. But when they submit it, it tells them, did I get it right? It doesn't give them the right answer, but it says if it's right or wrong. And then they can reattempt it. I've got videos, all that kind of stuff. So realistically, they should be able to get 80%, even up to 100% on like all of those. So that's 40% of their grade. And then if they take the test, similar to kind of what you're talking about, I give them 40% as a buffer. So if they take the test, they get a 40 on a bare minimum. Okay. The reason I do that is kind of a similar thought process to you, is that I don't want my students to get less than a 50, because I want the 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 on, a 10-point grade scale. And most of my students, if they've paid attention, if they've done their homework, if they've participated, they're going to score. I mean, what is that? You end up needing to do 20% accuracy to get the 10% that would get you to a 50 or better, right? So basically they need to know 30%, just more than 30% of the material to earn a D or better on the test, so that they're not failing the test, right? And then with that in mind, they literally cannot fail my class. So they get a 40% in a 60% category. That's 24%. If they have participated and they have their homework, that 40% plus the 24% that's given to them is a 64%. So I tell all my kids from day one, if you do your homework, you cannot fail my class. And none of them believe me. And I tell them multiple times throughout the entire school year. And we've talked about this before too. The only kids in my class that fail my class have less than 50% of their homework in.
Yeah, I'm definitely in that place, right? I mean, it's a higher percentage of kids than normal right now, but like the kids who are failing my class are the same in terms of like the percentage of work done. It's the same, right? If you don't show up and you don't turn work in, you're going to fail my class, right? And that's basically the only way to fail my class. One thing that might blow your mind a little bit, I know it blew my mind 2 years ago when we started doing this. We got a new principal, came from a school that is like almost entirely students of color and almost entirely free and reduced lunch population. And so like, we've all heard that phrase, right? Like D equals diploma, right? Like just get me my D and I'll get out of here kind of deal. They came up with a grade scale that is now allowable by our district that most of us are using at our school. And it's a no D grade policy, right? So you go from an F to a C. So like we're using a 4-point scale. So from a 0 to a 2.4, it shows up in the grade book as a D or as an F, sorry. As an F for the student, right? And then as soon as they get to 2.5, it jumps immediately to a C.
Okay.
And the logic behind that, and he had some data that I don't remember because the presentation that he gave us to convince us is 2 years ago, like pre-pandemic, so obviously I've forgotten everything about it, is that students they don't want the F, right? So students are going to push to get that F removed from the grade book. So if you give them the D as a landing place that feels safe, they'll stop. But if you make them get all the way to a C before they can have that safe landing space, they'll keep pushing to get to the C, right? Like they won't accept the F for whatever reason, so they'll keep climbing to get to that C. And there was a bunch of teachers that were wringing their hands and really nervous about, well, kids are going to see like this, it's an even bigger gap. Like, how am I going to get there? They're never going to get started. And I don't remember exactly how he responded to that, but I remember in my head, I was like, man, the kid who's looking at an F and is looking at like a 2.0 and it thinks that getting to a 2.5 is too far of a hill to climb, it's probably the same kid who's looking at a 30% and you're telling him to get to 60 is thinking it's too high of a hill to climb, right? Because those same teachers were the teachers who don't like the idea of the 50% rule. Like anytime I bring it up in a meeting at my school, I just get hollered at. So I've stopped bringing it up. But But so it's funny, right? Like you have these same people who are hollering about the 50% rule, but then no D's, the kids aren't going to try. Like, I think I made the same argument a minute ago, but whatever. So it's been really interesting to see how that works. And then we do have like this little caveat that if you really want to give a kid who has an F a D when it's time to turn in the um, the grades at the end of the semester, we can go in and like change it like retroactive or like manually, but like it doesn't calculate like that, right? The kids never know that that's an option. So
Right. I think that's such a brilliant play, and I know you mentioned it earlier too. Is the mind games almost that we can play as teachers with the students throughout the quarter. Uh,
mm-hmm.
and I'm going to say it that way because if you're using them properly, it's a positive, effective tool, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I will also put in missings, even if they turned it in, but it was garbage and it's a zero, right? I will not put it in as a zero. I'll put it in as a missing because in our grade book, when you put in a zero, it shows up as turned in. It doesn't hit like a special flag list for the parents, and
Mm.
it's like it's their way of like, hey, I turned it in, leave me alone. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you didn't. Missing, right? And so I
Yeah.
re-tag these as missing because it pops up, and those students that do have some support at home, it hits that bell, and they're like,
Yeah.
crap, okay, I got to actually do it. And so if they turn it in and it's a 2, right, I'll leave a 2 in there. But if they're
Mm-hmm.
not going to do anything, I'm going to keep hitting it as a missing. And then at the end, yeah, we'll go in and we'll put some buffers in if we need to. The other one I do, because I do so many daily activities and so many homework quiz things throughout, I will drop their lowest, but I don't ever tell them that.
Mm.
And so at the end of the quarter, I go back into the grade book and then I plug in those calculations. It drops the lowest, and then I record their score, and then I uncheck those boxes again. And it basically looks like they got extra credit. And I do it for 2 reasons. One, because I allow that room for error. Everyone's going to have an
Yeah.
off day. We've emotional train wrecks as high school students for the most part. We're almost guaranteed that one of the days we show up on a test or homework or whatever, that something's going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going to be our best work. So I just let that one fade out. I don't even tell them that's happening. And the other back end of it is I do not get emails from parents at the end of the quarter because their grade looks like it's 2% higher than what it's posted. Nobody complains about a grade that's 2% higher.
No, for sure not, including the admin, which is a part of this conversation, unfortunately. That's an interesting thing because like the policy that was in place at the school that I'm at now before this new principal arrived was this thing called the matrix that
Mhm.
they wanted us to use, but we didn't have to use. And it was this thing that would take out their lowest score and their highest score and then like average out the middle clump, right? The mode or the mean, whatever the appropriate math term in there is. And so I didn't like it for a couple of reasons because like this is this is probably the biggest hill that I would be willing to die on for grades as a teacher. Like if someone told me I could not do this, I might legitimately stop teaching in that space. Or if I was told I could never do this again as a teacher, I might quit the profession. And that is, I believe in the idea of like legitimately having a growth mindset as it relates to the grade book and trying to create an L curve, right? So not manipulating the grades to create an L curve, but so one thing I do, I try and have.
What's your L curve? What's that look like for you?
That means that a majority of the students should be in the B to A range, right? Because
Okay.
because I've done my job and they've learned stuff since they came into my room, and I've given them ample opportunity to earn that. So what I don't like is the idea of grades as an average of the work that you've done. Because to me, learning is a process, and what I want your grade to reflect is not the average of what you've done, but where you ended up, right? I want to know how far did you come. So I will try and set my grade book up, and like the only tool that I can really use with the system we have now is like, say we have 4 essays throughout the course of the semester, which we're obviously not doing now, but like 4 essays throughout the semester. The first one's only going to be worth 1 point, then 2 points, then 3 points, then 4 points. So the first time you wrote me an essay, you're trying to figure out what my expectations are. I'm giving lots of feedback. You're kind of trying to figure things out. Maybe you didn't do so well. Well, if by the second time you do it, you take the feedback, you understand what you're supposed to do, you just got a 2 instead of a 1, right? That practically erases the impact of the first one. And then if you're able to repeat that level of learning on the third attempt, you've definitely erased the original low score. And then the last one's worth 4, right? So it's worth
Right.
the rest of them almost, or not the rest of them combined, because I'm better at math than that. But right, it's worth way more than the rest of them are. So it has this impact of allowing students who have gotten better at things, if they've gotten more attempts at it, to get
Right.
credit for that, right? To get credit for the process of their learning.
Right. No, I mean, you literally have just built a weighted average scale so
Mm-hmm.
that students later in the learning process has a better impact on their grade versus, okay, I jacked up week 1, now I'm stuck for the whole quarter. No, it's I learned there and now it's actually only 10%, but in the grade book early, right? Kind of this manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
it's 100% your grade early.
Yeah.
So you've got motivation to do the second one. Now it's only 33% versus 66%, right? So now
Mm-hmm.
it's feeling better. And yeah, like you said, like that's a brilliant combination of building a weighted average to show where your students got to, and that's what you're actually putting the focus on,
Mm-hmm.
and creating that intrinsic like, oh crap, like I need to fix this and I need to fix this now. Because not many of them, even if you tell them that that's what's happening, are going to recognize that that F is really only 10% of their full quarter grade.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And
yeah.
then it's, and then I do that within each category, right? So I have like 4
Right.
categories, like speaking and listening and writing and whatever. So like that's part of it. And then another like kind of element of all of that is really thinking through, like you talked about, you raised a great point, right? They're teenagers going through high school. It's a rough time, right? It's very few of us who go through high school and don't have any bad days that also impact our academics.
Yeah.
So I don't do it as much with the ones early in the process. Like if I see, like, I'm not gonna lie. So if my principal's, which he's not, but if he's listening to this, right? Like if I have a student who's got a 3.4 and they need a 3.5 to get an A, I'm gonna go back and look at the trend lines. And if they have one assignment that's just totally an outlier on the low end, I'll just excuse it, right? I'll just take it out of the grade book and see if that gets them across the finish line or whatever. And then the second part of that, to your point, like we get to that assignment that's worth 4 points, right? It could literally make or break your final grade for the semester. If you had a really bad week that week and you didn't finish the project or whatever, extensions, opportunities for extra support, like how can we make sure that the fact that you had a crappy day, week, whatever, still allows you to get to where you should be, because I know of what you're capable, and as long as I allow you to show what you're capable of, you'll show me, right? It's just like that day wasn't the best day to ask for that particular work sample.
Right. We both played sports. We all know how we performed on tests the week after a loss versus after a win.
Or just if there was a test on a Friday and we played Inglemoor on Thursday night, right? Like
Right.
doesn't even matter. Or whoever we played on Thursday night. And I
Right.
think about that all the time as like football is my primary sport, right? And I think this is a real thing that really needs to be talked about. So it's worth carving out some time for it here. Athletics. Most sports, pretty much every sport other than football, 2 school nights a week.
Yeah.
You're getting home. If you're a varsity athlete, you're getting home at 10 or 11 o'clock.
Yep.
You're probably not in a great headspace. Like, good on you if you are, to like be in a good headspace to get some work done before the match or before the
Right.
game or whatever. But like, we're on the bus while you're riding to your baseball game or your volleyball game or whatever.
Right.
But we all also know that like the coach's expectation, if you're a varsity volleyball player, is to put your book bag away and cheer on the freshman girls while they're playing, and then cheer on the JV team while they're playing, and then stay and play, then ride the bus back home with the team because we do this together. It's a team experience,
Right.
right? All these expectations. So you're getting home 11, 12 o'clock at night, and most schools you're getting up 6, 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
How was I supposed to study for the test tomorrow?
Well, and then again, compound that with I lost or I had a crappy game. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
train wrecked there. I didn't sleep enough, so I haven't recovered. And my boyfriend said something stupid, so I ripped into him, right? Like that was real.
Yeah,
Like,
that is real. Or,
I lived through that. Like I know what those students were doing because I had some of them in my class. I'm like, yo, Kamo, what's cracking? Like, she's like, Freeburg, you know what's up. I was like, okay, I do know what's up. But still, come on. And then, yeah, exactly what you're saying. Like, we got to be able to build in these buffers to help them so they can recover.
Yeah, and so, like, I mean, that's a whole nother, like, how do we I think athletics are hugely important to the high school experience. I'm not saying like, oh, we got to get rid of athletics because they're impacting grades. I'm saying teachers need to be flexible, right? That's the message here is like, be flexible to the fact that there was a drama performance last night that went till 10 o'clock at night. And then
Yep.
there's the whole adrenaline come down that is required for you to be able to focus and get work done or go to sleep and then come to school ready to excel.
Right, right. Going from peak state into sleep is a time process you got to be able to work through. So yeah,
Absolutely.
no matter what your expertise is, whatever you're in flow with. So
What's your late work policy?
I was gonna say, I was like, with that in mind, like there's got to be a variation of what this looks like, right? And I've changed mine quite a bit. The one I currently use is the district one, and I don't actually agree with it. I think it's too easy. So where I'm at currently is we accept any and all work whenever it's turned in up to the end of the quarter. And even that has flexibility. Like, if the kid turns it in and you want to be lenient, we can always go back and change the grade, blah, blah, blah. Right. Okay. So it's up to 100%, turn it in whenever you want. And for me, that has created a lot of frustration because I get students that have fallen into a pattern of, I'm going to try to do all of it in the last week. I'm going to be overwhelmed. I'm going to be stressed. I'm not going to have my best performance because I did this with all of my classes. And then you throw maybe one weird day in there that jacks up their whole schedule anyways, because nothing goes to planned. And I end up with mediocre work, and I'm either stuck in a spot where I fail a kid who I know is capable and just poor time management, or I'm the one who's putting in a 12-hour day after my 7 hours of teaching so that I can grade this group of students that has waited to the very last minute so I can get grades in so they get sent home on time because my admin wants grades in the day after the quarter or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so whatever that final date is, the kids push it all the way to the end with all of their crap, and they know they can get 100% on it, so why do it early? My personal preference, and I did this when I was at Woodinville, is every student is a B student. But if you want to be an A student, you got to do that crap on time. That's my personal philosophy. So I used to take any and all work up to whatever date they wanted for an 80% maximum. So I didn't care when you turned it in, if it was a test, if it was a homework, if it was daily work. I mean, daily work, I still gave them effort, so they always got 100% on that. But their homework, they could get up to an 80 if it was late. Their test, they could get up to an 80 if it was, a retake or whatever. Because I truly believe that every student is capable of being a B student. But if you want to be a top tier student, you got to do that crap on time.
Okay, so that's interesting, right? Because it's funny, we were actually both starting in the same place, but wanting to like arrive at a new one. So that has been my policy for ages. Is like, if you want to get a 4 or you want to get an exceed standard, you have to turn it in on time.
Yeah.
And then like another kind of nudge that I would give students is if you want to turn it in early and get feedback, so you know what you need to do to get a 4. Here's the deadline for that, right? Like, so if you turn it in on the day that it's quote unquote due, you're going to get the grade that you get. And then if you turn it in a little bit early and it's a 3.5 or a 3, I can say, hey, I need you to add another piece of evidence, or I need you to do this in order to get a 4. And I kind of thought of that as like cougar time. You remember cougar time, right? If you're on time, you're late, be 10 minutes early to everything.
And if you're late, you're dead.
And then, so like I've evolved on that as well. Like that used to be a standard in my first head coaching job. Like I used to we changed it to Highlander time, right? And it was like, you got to be 10 minutes early. And then I realized like that is so not how like most people brains work. Like just tell me where I need to be, when I need to be there, and what I need to have ready to go. And like, so if you really want me to be there at 5:50 instead of 6, just say 5:50. Right. Don't tell me 6 o'clock. Don't forget cougar time. Like just say 5:50. And so I backed away from the whole like feedback loop thing and kind of just said like, I will give you feedback, and if you want to like try again, great. I'm happy to like re-examine this. But I was in that same place where it was like, if you want to get like max score, got to turn it in on time. And then the more I've thought about it, and this is all happening this year, and it might be part of story time a little bit. I might be stepping on my own story time a little bit, but like I'm thinking about where I'm evolving in my thinking on it is the reward of doing it on time is twofold, whether I do anything or not. Number one, if you do it on time, you're not stressed at the end of the semester, which already has its own stress because teachers are throwing finals at you and it feels stressful, right? There's a built-in stress to the last week and a half of any grading period, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
even if I try to avoid it, other teachers are going to create it. So like that's just there.
Right.
So there's already stress there. And then if you're behind in all 8 of your classes or all 4 of your classes, guess what? You're going to be extra stressed because you're trying to do 20 assignments in a week, not 2. Or in my case, like I've got 1 final project due that last week, and it's the only thing that we're working on, right? And you have basically nothing but time to work on it is what the last week of my class is usually like. So like for me, it's like number one, your reward for like doing what you were supposed to do is that you don't have to freak out at the end of the semester, right? You're actually probably finding it to be the easiest week of the semester because I'm only asking you to do one thing and I'm giving you probably more time than you need to work on it. Yeah. The second part of that is if you have learned the behavior of being on time as part of just like your personal habits, guess who's going to succeed more when they're getting jobs and getting promotions? And like if you have that built in as a habit already, you're going to get that. And to circle back to that, yes, would it be good if I trained all of my students to have that mindset? Of course it would, right? Like but that's not what grades are about, right? Grades aren't about, I mean, for me anyways, like the late score thing and the best comeback I had for a teacher, because I can predict one of your responses, is, well, what about me and my time and when I have to grade all this stuff? Well, in all honesty, let's be real. If you have 150 students and only 120 completed the day that it was due, you didn't have to grade for as long that day. You're going to have to grade more at the end of the quarter, but the time is the time. So it's not really an on me thing. So I understand that it's not a popular take. I'm probably in the very slim single digit minority on this, but I've definitely arrived at a point where like the actual deadline is when I have to turn grades in.
Right. I like where you went with that, and my brain immediately, from like a bit of an entrepreneur mindset, went to fireworks stand and like how those last 2 days are just completely out of control, bonkers. And it's like, no, we've contracted these kids to like work for us for those 13, 14-hour brutal days. Mm-hmm. And like, they don't expect overtime. Like we throw them other kickers and things like that, right? So we keep them happy and they want to keep working for us. But like, I mean, if you were like, hey, you're going to work a bunch of 30-hour weeks, and then that last week you're going to work 80 hours, and I'm not going to pay you a penny of overtime, the average person in our society is going to be like, yo, I just worked 40 hours of overtime this week. You owe me time and a half on those back 40, you know? Right? So there's like that piece of it that I see, but I wasn't even going to go there. I was more the idea of like, I think I agree with you that we should be training our students to be showing up on time because it makes them more successful in everything else they do. And so by encouraging them to do it on time to earn that A, if that's something that's meaningful for them, it sets them up in that habit, in my opinion, versus, you know, hey, I'm so used to being able to show up last minute and still being able to pull whatever score. Most of the time, now granted, you're going to get away with it sometimes, but most of the time, if I show up to an interview 30-40 minutes late and I come rolling in and I crush the interview, but they were like, why were you late? And you're like, I don't know, just didn't seem that important. I figured I'd do it when I did it. Here I am. You guys want to hear from me? Because I'm awesome, you know. And like you crushed the interview.
Well, you're probably not going to get to do the interview in that case, but yeah,
you might not get the interview. Period. But let's even pretend you do get to do the interview. Yeah. They're still going to be like, "Yo, that dude was rad," but I don't know if they're going to ever show up to the meeting on time when we need them to close with, you know, this big transaction. You know, like that's still going to hit them as a negative, and they're going to be an 80% student in the pool for hiring.
Yeah, and so like here's where I struggle with these things, and this is where I know you're potentially in a transition here, but I think it would be really interesting, and I'm actually trying to talk to some other teachers who I know disagree with me in my building about like actually comparing statistics on this, is so here's my hypothesis.
Okay.
Coach Urban Meyer, who I'm not really that huge of a fan of, but he's got some really good points, has this thing called the 10-80-10 principle, which is that 10% of your athletes are high flyers, like for Urban Meyer, right? The Tim Tebows and the Jason, like the kids who are always going to give their best effort and put all the work and do like go above and beyond, right? And they're going to do that kind of regardless of the conditions around them.
Right. And
then you've got another 10% that are the opposite of that, and they're going to be the opposite of that kind of regardless of the circumstances around them, right? They just are who they are, and it's going to take something truly life-altering, and let's be real, an F in the grade book is not life-altering, to actually get them to change their behavior, right?
Right.
The other 80% is where you should focus your energy on, right? Like that's their whole thing of the coaching staff at Ohio State when he was there, is like, we got to stop worrying about the 10% because we have very little impact on that two groups. Where we have a ton of impact is on that 80%, and can we get more of that 80% to behave like the upper 10%?
Right.
And so my hypothesis as it relates to that thought process around academic work is that there are very few of my students who are in the like F struggling to get to a C, again, because we have that no D policy range, that the difference between a 3 and a 4 is even on their radar, right? Like they're not even thinking about, oh, if I turn this in late, I can't get an A, because they're not even thinking about getting an A.
Right.
Right. They're just trying to think about, I don't want to do the work right now. And so for me, the benefit of taking away the penalty for the late assignment, to go back to your revolutionary thing about the Super Mario effect, is that there's no penalty, right? Because if you create something that they're looking at and they're going, I don't see how I can recover this, I give up, then that's the response that you're going to get. And so I would be really interested to compare notes with a couple of other teachers. If I could get like 4 other teachers to do what I'm doing across great content, and 4 other teachers, it'd be easy to find the other 4, right? The 4 who disagree with me. That won't be hard. But compare across content and just look at like, where do our grades end up, like each like grading period, like progress reports, quarter mark, end of the semester, like where are kids at that point? My actual instinct is I don't actually think it's going to change that much.
Yeah. I mean, first I want to address your 10-80-10. Like two things that I hear all the time in business that I think are 100% true with that statement and in the school is the 80-20 rule, right? Like 20% of your group is going to do 80% of the work. I think that's part of your high flyers, right? And then the other one I've always heard is the 90-10, and that for any company, there's always a bottom 10% that you could chop off and you wouldn't even notice they're gone. And for me in the classroom, no matter what I've done, no matter how many doors I've left open, opportunities I've given, whether there is a penalty or not a penalty, whatever it is, right? Most of my classes are 20 to 30 kids, right? There's usually 2 or 3 kids that I fail every single year. And it drives me nuts. And then I think about this rule. I'm like, oh yeah, that's just 10%. 10% of my kids don't give a crap, and they're never going to, for whatever reason, until that life-changing thing. Oh, that was the other thing I was going to do. You were talking about this idea of how do we even make the kids feel like an F in the grade book now might relate to me losing my home or losing a job or whatever, right? My first year of teaching at the high school, I did this. I always like building financial and business stuff into my classroom. And I gave the students points from their homework and from their test, and then like a weekly salary of points that they could use for things. And they had to pay rent for their desk. They had to pay rent for their chair. And then they needed, then they were able to like buy bathroom passes or using their headphones or, eating in class, like all these different privileges they could buy with their points. And I was like, you guys got to budget your points, because if you run out of points, I will take your desk from you and you will learn on the ground. And they're like, yeah, right? And I had a kid that was part of my bottom 10%, right? And he was using his points, failed the test, doesn't have enough points now to cover the rental of his desk. I legit took his desk, pushed it to the side, made him sit front and center so he could still learn, he could still be there. And the rest of the class, dude, like jaws dropped, like, holy crap, I can't believe Freeburg did it. Like, wow. I had that same kid and his best friend, I run into him like 6 years later, and they're like, yo, Freeburg, remember when you took my desk and you made me sit on the ground? He's like, I have never been late on my payment for my rent ever since. Like, I'm not getting kicked out of my apartment. So like that's like the gamification, making these things real life, making them meaningful. I mean, there's not a real penalty, right? Like, I still gave the kid his desk back the next day, but it landed the point. Mm-hmm. and obviously it stuck. Literally 6 years later, I run into these kids on the street and they're like, oh, Freeburg.
Well, I'm not at all shocked that that's one of those stories that they're going to be telling when they're doing whatever a 40 years from now podcast is, right? Like, they'll be talking about that forever, because that's also like a funny moment at school for sure. I love that idea of being able to, I think the gamification thing, that's why I really thought that Super Mario Effect thing that you introduced to us on Tuesday was so revolutionary, because I do think it changes the calculus of a lot of the things that we're thinking about, and I haven't had enough time to digest it to really think through all the ramifications. And until I get there, like, my thought process is, the research that I've done on the teenage brain and the physiology of a teenager is they literally don't understand consequences, right? Like, they don't understand how, like, this thing that I'm doing today is going to impact my life 10 years from now. Like, that is just something they're literally not wired to do. And so that's where I really struggle with the teachers. And I'm not coming from a place of like, you're trying to hurt the kids, because, for example, you and I are best friends, and one of the reasons that we're still so close all these years later is I know that you want to do best by your kids, right? Like, your ultimate goal is to make sure that all of your kids are successful. So I know that you're not coming from a place of harm. And like, I just wonder about, like, is school / the grade book the appropriate, is giving a kid an F in the grade book the appropriate way to teach them that lesson? And so I would actually argue, you actually prove my point. Giving a kid an F in the grade book, or giving them a 0 for a missing assignment, is not the way to teach them to pay their rent on time. The way that you teach them that is through something far more tangible. And you were able to create a low stakes version of that in your classroom that is extremely creative and extremely unique. I don't know that I've ever heard of another teacher doing something like that. And I also can think about, like, in a classroom full of BIPOC students, that might land differently than a student, like a classroom full of like upper class white kids, right? Like, there's like a different,
was, yeah.
Like, so there's like a different element to that as well. And I'm not criticizing the idea, because it obviously worked. And I think that's the goal, is to be creative about these things. But I think you're almost proving my point for me, right? Like, if you had just given that kid an F, nothing changes.
Well, and I mean, no, it doesn't. And that was the same kid that I was, desperately trying to get to pull his C so that he didn't have to repeat stuff. And he had enough of a drive. He wasn't my bottom 10%, and he did, get out of that hole. But yeah, the learning did not come from, because he failed plenty of other classes, right? Like, he failed plenty of other classes, and he did not learn from those Fs. You're right. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Like, are we just shuffling kids from one level to the next, and that's okay, and we don't need them to learn, we don't need them to have anything? Or like, where do you actually fail a kid and hold them back? Or do you not ever?
So, I mean, that's a great question, and it leads me into like my first question, like, what's the point of grades in the first place?
Yeah.
Right. So, like, you and I have talked so much about, like,
well, hierarchy, right? We love hierarchy in our country.
Yes, learning is about a process. Learning is about having a growth mindset, right? Like failure, try again, get better, feedback loop, right? Like, that's the learning. So what is the purpose of the grades? And at the risk of like going on a complete tangent, I'll just say it and move on. Like, the system is designed to work the way that it's working, and we know that it's not working for a large group of our students. And I'll say it again, it is designed not to work for those students. It's working the way it's supposed to. So knowing that, like, you think about the grades, what are they really for? Well, first of all, I can't think of the last time that a kid was actually not dragged kicking and screaming by the admin across the finish line, right? Because here's the dirty little secret that they don't say out loud at the admin meetings when they're telling us to do everything we can to help our kids because we love our kids. They get graded by the district people based on the graduation rate at their high school. If you are a principal and your graduation rate isn't at the number that the district wants it at, you have teeth marks in your pants.
Yeah.
Right? So their goal is to get everybody across the finish line. And so especially when you take it from the approach of, well, if we just want everyone to pass and graduate and pass the buck, quote unquote, on to the corporations to actually teach these kids some lessons about what it means to be a hard worker and yada, yada, yada. Like that whole thought process, like, again, like what is the purpose of the grades and what are we actually trying to do here? And that's why I keep coming back to the whole growth mindset. It's not about an average. It's about what learning can I honestly say took place in my classroom? And then how do I manipulate the grade system so that I can show that in a grade book?
Yeah. I mean, I love the manipulation piece, right? Because you get the kid, and you've told me stories of this too, where, excuse me, we get that kid that we know is more capable than what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and we figure out a way to get them to pass because we know in the long run, our ultimate goal, like we've talked about before, is keep as many doors open as they start with at high school. Don't shut all these doors on them. And
Mm-hmm.
if the kid is capable and we just need to correct some behavior issues, then let's work on those and keep doors open. But if I'm doing my job the way I believe I'm supposed to, where it's when you leave my classroom, you are capable of arguably 60% of this content, and you don't know 20% of it or more, like it doesn't make sense to me to say, yeah, they're good, move them on. Like there's a part of me that's like, hey, that kid needs to keep doing that. Like if you want to move them on, that's fine, but that kid still needs to keep doing that while they're moving on. Like I don't know. Like, I'm not going to sign off and say, hey, that kid passed my class because that kid didn't do crap in my class. You know, like.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And like one of the things I kind of come back to when I think about that concept, because I want to be really upfront with anyone who's listening right now. Like I am completely schizophrenic when it comes to these conversations. Like there is like a legitimate, like get off my lawn. China is coming for us. And if we don't all buckle down and work our asses off, we're going to get passed. And if you want to know what it's like to live in a society that's in second place in the world, okay, but like that's going to suck. And the other part of my brain is like, none of this is real. It's all just like made up hierarchical like stuff that's meant to do the things that I just said, right? The system is working the way it's supposed to. I'll just keep saying that. So like with that thought process in mind, here's where I get frustrated with the, well, I don't want to pass that kid along. I've got a kid who's arrived in my class. He doesn't do very much work. I was just telling you a story about him before we walked in today on the podcast. He's brilliant.
Yeah. Pass that kid.
Not just pass that kid. What's he doing in my class? He's smart. Literally, I feel bad. He's smarter than the rest of the kids in my class. He should not be in the 9th grade.
Yeah.
I mean, there's content like because of how we do content in the social studies situation, right? Where it's like we learn about the Holocaust in 9th grade. We learn about resistance to colonialism in the 9th grade. I think that content is hugely important and something that every single person, at least in our country, and I would argue on the planet, needs to be made aware of and needs to have that thought process through. But guess what? This kid, he's already thought about those things. He's already done that research on his own and connected dots from what's happening in Myanmar and with the Uyghur population in China today to the Holocaust, which we're learning about right now in class. I'm not even asking my 9th graders to do that yet. And he's like, he did it last year on his own because he watched a YouTube video that he got interested in and he went down a rabbit hole and did a bunch of reading. So if we're not gonna tell those kids to skip to the front of the line or whatever, right? Like if we're not gonna just move them through because they're already able to do the skills, then why am I holding a kid back? Right? Like we don't do it on both ends. That's my point.
We are, right? Like I got a friend whose daughter graduated a year and a half early with an AA. Like she was brilliant. She put in the hard work. She graduated mid-junior year and she had her associates. She was done with her 4-year degree, 3 years of college, right? Like she skipped through the lines. she was what, 22 years old, 21 years old with her 4-year degree, or yeah, younger than that, right? She would have been like probably 19 or 20, right? Like
Okay.
she moved through it quick. And I think we do allow that. And at the same time, if there's, but I won't go too deep on this, right? Because we do need, to a certain degree, for our system to work, to have kids that are at the bottom of the pile, that are taking the bottom of the pile jobs. And it is part of the system, unfortunately, and it works because it's the way we design it, like you said. And I don't know, like, what would happen if I passed all those kids?
Nothing.
Like, would it change, or would I still have those same kids taking those bottom of the pile jobs? Because once they get to the real world, they're going to get their butts kicked. They're going to lose the job they might have had an open door to, and they're going to fall where they would have anyways.
I would argue the latter. I mean, again, I don't have any empirical data for that, but and like the conspiracy side, I mean, to like totally take it to another level, you think about grade inflation, right? You talked about, like, we were going to talk about grade inflation today. So let's address it head on. Yeah. I would argue that there is a direct correlation between credit companies, financial aid, college, and grade inflation. Yeah, give every kid a B so we can let them all into the University of Oregon so they can all be paying us $80,000 for college for the rest of their lives with interest rates, right? Like, again, the system is working the way it was designed to, and it's not just the people at the bottom of the pile. I saw this statistic today. I gotta go see if I can find it, maybe on Twitter, about like how much wealth, like the percentage of national wealth millennials own at this point in where we're at as a generation versus Generation X and the quote unquote and the boomers.
Yeah.
And it's significantly less.
Well, I mean, to a certain degree, it should be, because of compound interest and family worth and all that kind of stuff, right? Like, where you make the majority of your wealth is in your latter years, when you let it just keep growing, and now you can't spend it as fast as you earn it.
No. So this was based on like the boomers at this point in their progression as a generation.
Oh, gotcha,
so it's not like now.
It's not like now 30 versus a millennial age. Okay, that makes okay.
I'm going to see if I can find this. Well, you can talk more about grade inflation, because I know you have thoughts too.
Well, I mean, I was going to say, I was like, I find it personally entertaining when we name 4 or 5 students as valedictorians with 4.2s, right? I'm like, how did we end up with 5 students in their entire 4-year high school career? Some of them 5 because they took honors AP classes in their 8th grade year, which hit their transcript 8th grade year. And now they're doing college level courses and getting dual credit their senior years. How did those students, 5 of them, right, in a relatively small group, I think we only have 250 students in each of our classes here in Bowling Green. Like, how did 5 of them have flawless scores across the board? Like, like on the plus side, that we're calling it a 4.2, like, I don't know. So for me, it's like, did that kid never have a bad day? Or did we literally just say, oh, you're right, I'm not going to be the first and only student, teacher to give you a B. Here's your A, right? And so we pad their stats.
Or did they just have a parent that was super aggressive and everybody just caved?
Oh, no, both are true, right? There's the, I don't want to ruin it. And then there's that parent's going to tell me I am the worst human and go for my job if I give their son or daughter a B, heaven forbid, because they earned an 87 in my class and they need to keep their perfect score valedictorian because that equals money and college tuition, right? Like, there's so much that ties into it. It's crazy. So,
okay, let me read this statistic to you and tell me you're better at math and you understand economics better than I do. So here's the tweet. It's from Dan Price, Seattle, on Twitter. He's famous for doing stuff or he's notorious, whatever the right word is, for economic stuff. Millennials hold 4.8% of all wealth. There are now 40-year-old millennials. At that same age, Generation X had 9% of all wealth, and the boomers had 21% of all wealth. The largest generation in history by population did what the system told them to do, and became the most educated in history. Now they're the poorest in history.
There's a lot of things in my initial take. There's a lot of things that go into that. Largely kind of what I was talking about earlier with generational wealth and growth and life expectancy, right? Like the average person when the baby boomers were kids lived to age 64 and retirement was age 65, right? Like they didn't retire. That was also, it's also why Social Security worked and now it's crumbling, right?
Yes.
So the idea that you've got an extra 25 years to compound your wealth, double it 3 times over. So 8 times what your wealth was. And again, this all taken into account. Let's say somebody actually properly saved money. Let's say they've got $4 million just for fun. I'll throw a number out there, right? They've got $4 million in the till when they retire. They're going to live on 5%. They got their 200 grand for the year. They're very happily, they're retired, right? That would be a wealthy family, right?
Yeah.
Now you take that group that would have died at age 65, 66, 67 with that $4 million. They now live until they're 85. They weren't able to spend any of that $4 million. And so they live on their 200 grand like they've been doing. That $4 million turns into 8, turns into 16, turns into 32. And so now when they die at age 85, 82, they have 32 million worth of net worth instead of 4 million, just because they lived longer and they properly vested it. So now you've got more wealth up here, again, generational wealth. And so there's a smaller percentage when we're starting the wheelhouse and we've got no money. So for me, that's one of the things that jumps out. But I mean, at the same time, I would agree. We also have so much debt because we're all supposed to go to college and we all took out loans because our boomer parents didn't have a savings account for us to gift it to us. Not all of us. And we're living in a job, most of us, that barely affords the education that required to get it. Like that is rough. Like if you're coming out of a 4-year college with a mortgage payment and you're still only earning 30 grand like out the gates in college, like that's rough.
Yeah. And so like I like caveat, I know it's Twitter, so it's like obviously oversimplified and there's probably holes in his argument. The way I read that and the reason it had such an impact on me this morning when I saw it is I interpreted it to mean like at age 40, boomers 21%, Gen X 9%, millennials 4%. And I was like,
right.
But if it's the compound thing that you're saying, then that's like an obvious, like major, like just he's essentially lying with numbers, right? Which people do all the time because most of us don't understand them. So,
well, and you can make statistics mean whatever you want them to mean. And
yes,
because real life has so many variables in it, it's really hard to make a math classroom problem out of real life.
Yes. All right. I know I took us on a huge left turn. I'll circle us back. We've talked about our late policies. What are your thoughts about makeups/retakes? I'll put them in the same category.
So we kind of touched on it, right? But I'm going to accept any work. My homework quizzes, you can get up to 100% on it. I don't care when you do it. You can retake it. You're going to know what your score is immediately. Put in the time, put in the effort. You got resources. You should get 100%. That's an effort thing for me. Check the boxes, go through the motions, do it. Use it as preparation for your test. And it's not the same way you had described it, but the more I think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, 10% for, the daily task stuff, 30% for the homework, and then 60% for the test. By the time you get to the test, you've tried this thing multiple times. You should be ready to show me you know what you're doing. Unfortunately, again, for number of reasons, my kids don't do any of that work. They take the test, they fail the test, then they go and they make up all their homework, and because they never even did their homework before the test in the first place. So I will retake tests. Our policy at the moment is up to 100%, so I honor it. I believe they should only get up to an 80%. I love our idea about the Super Mario effect and doing a 70% starting point. And I think I'm interested and curious about where this puts mindsets, because to a certain degree, if I don't do an assignment, I know I have a 0 and nothing has changed. But with the idea that you had presented with, what if we started at 70 and there's no penalty for trying, right? I know that if I turn in this assignment, and even if this is a garbage assignment, no penalty, I'm still a 70, and I can try again if I want to move up. But now the penalty is, if I don't turn it in, it drops to a 0, right? Or at least the mind games where we can drop it in is a missing for the moment. I think that's an interesting approach, and I would like to play with that more moving forwards, right?
I would too. And like, so like where I come in on the makeups and the retakes, like I have one thing that I have a pretty hard and fast rule with. I give multiple choice. I call them context quizzes, where like on the notes that we took about World War II, like you need to understand some names and dates, like as we're telling the next part of the critical thinking story. So like those are open notes. So everything's on the slides. Like there's nothing that's on the test that's not on. And my kids know this. I'm not giving anything away if they're listening. If it's on the slides, it could be on the test, right? If it's something that I'm adding to the slides, it's just me trying to add color and make it interesting, because me just reading numbers and names off a slide is boring as hell. So like telling the story, but the numbers that you need to know and stuff are on the slides. And so I don't let kids make up the test. I won't let them take the test if they don't have the notes.
Gotcha.
I just won't let them try. I'll be like, you don't have the notes. Like, go get them from a friend. Figure out a way to get the notes. The lecture's recorded online. Like, figure out a way to get the notes. Show me that your notes have been stamped with my little Game of Thrones or whatever stamp I've used that week that I thought was funny. And then, like, take the test, right? And then, but you can't retake it. Then you can't retake it because the notes are the notes, right? Like, I don't know how. Like, if you had the notes, that's the information that you had written down. I don't know how to help you. And I don't even worry about it. Like, I've had teachers ask me, like, well, your quizzes are on Google Forms, which means they have their Chromebooks out. They could just look up the information. It's like, yeah, they could. And if they're smart enough to know how to Google the right answer for the conversation that we're having, then they know what they need to know.
Right.
I don't really care. I mean, that's the whole purpose.
They know the keywords to get the answer. That is the answer.
That's all I care about. Do you know how to find the information? I gave it to you, so you should have it written on a piece of paper. And if you're going to like not do the work and then try and find it online, then fine. You did the work at your own pace, whatever. I'm not going to get angry. And again, the kids who don't take the notes and take the time to like go find the answers, it's a very thin, right? That's a small group of students.
Right.
To your point about thinking about like makeups and retakes, my thought process as I'm continuing to think about this 70% idea, like starting at 70%, what I've done with retakes is I don't really have, honestly, a policy. I haven't thought enough about it as a teacher because of the way my class used to be designed, and it's different this year. But like, I don't have a certain number that you're allowed to try, right? So if you submit an evidence-based paragraph and it's missing something that's making it so it's not a 4, all I do is in the comment section, I tell you what you need to do to get a 4, even though that's already on the rubric that's on the assignment. But I'll remind you, hey, you're missing, you need another piece of evidence, and you need to do this differently to get to a 4. Whatever your grade was, I just put the list in.
Right.
And then if you do all those things and you resubmit it, 4. If you do like 2 of those things and you don't do the other 2 that I said, I delete the first 2 bullet points and I put the other 2 back at the top. Like, here's your new grade, and if you want a 4, here's what you need to do.
Right.
And it's kind of up to them how much they want to retake it. And so my thought process on this 70% thing, they turn in a clear lack of effort assignment. Your feedback is not like my comment back to you will be, you did not try hard enough for me to give you any feedback. So you can't really improve your score on the retake. So you still get the 70%, right? Like you did the thing. I'm not going to penalize you. And if you make an honest attempt to do the work, I will tell you what you need to do so that you figure out how to jump over the pit. Like, I will literally give you the feedback of, this is how you stomp on a mushroom head, or this is how you create an extra life. Like, I will tell you the answers in the feedback form. And so the next attempt is more informed, right?
Hashtag Game Genie.
Yeah. See, there's so many things to do with this. It
would be so much fun.
I know I'm talking like a man possessed with all this grading stuff because I'm like railing against the system, but at the same time, I think the Super Mario thing can completely change the way we all think about all of this stuff. So I'm just like giddy.
Yeah. Well, and again, like, if you want kids to recover, make it meaningful and give them unlimited attempts. Even if you give yourself like a maximum threshold, like I would argue to say 95% of the times my kids retook a test when I did have my 80% max on there, 95% of them would come up with like a 77, 78, 72. Like they wouldn't even hit the threshold.
Yeah.
And some of the ones that would, great. They're still pumped. They're like, oh, awesome. I got an 85. Heck yeah, I'll take an 80 in the grade book. They're stoked out of their mind. But like the idea of starting at a 70 and not getting punished and then passing the level to move up, I think is a brilliant idea. And if we can do that more and make things more game, I love it. So I don't know if you've got more stuff for story time, but I'd love to hear it if you got it.
Quickly, just building on that before we get to story time, I do have like one thing for story time. I just want to like reiterate to people, like we keep talking about the barrier to entry. In order to get kids to feel motivated to do the retake, to do the makeup, to turn in the late work, the 50% rule to me is like if you're trying to figure all this stuff out, if you're a new teacher and you're unsure, or you're a teacher who's felt like you've reached like a fork in the road, the 50% rule is a huge game changer, because kids, when you're 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out from the end of a grading period and you see 20% and you know you need to get to 60 to get a passing grade, it is a completely legitimate response to go, well, that's a lost cause. Like, I don't see how I'm going to do that, especially if you don't have like a real welcoming, like, I'm here to like help you through the process. Like if they think they're on their own with that,
right,
they're not going to start. So that 50% rule gives kids like, man, I can get there.
Yeah.
Right. So I will circle back to that as like, that is a great, if you just have that rule in place, you will see a difference in the students who are trying to recover from the original failed attempt.
Right. Hey guys, interrupting real quick for a quick reminder. Jump on littlebiged.com. Join our mail list there so you have access to our free resources. We're going to throw in the link to the Super Mario effect so you can go watch that if you've not seen that before. We're also going to tie in a few of our thoughts around how do we make this actually part of our gradebook? How do we create lessons that feel like games and things like that? You can look forward to that in our free resources this week, and excited to have you be a part of our community. Now let's get back to story time with K-Dub.
All right, let's talk about let's go story time here. So my story time is a little bit different. I spent a lot of time kind of thinking about, and you guys all heard how animated I got talking about grades and how the system works. So it's kind of a combination of a story and both just like a plea for anyone who's listening to think about this for the rest of this school year anyways, right? Like we picked this topic because we know some of you are getting near the end of your school year. And so I want you to kind of just think about this as I tell this story, kind of my plea at the end of all this. I'm calling it my pandemic plea story. So our students, once again, I know you guys have all heard me say it before, we've been remote learning since last March, and we are still technically doing remote learning. Like we are doing, when it comes to learning new content, introducing new concepts, and teaching all of our students at the same time, we are still doing that remotely at our school. Okay, and then we have a few kids, and it's a growing minority, meaning it's the group of kids who are in person right now is getting less and less. But we have a group of kids who are coming for an hour and 20 minutes to each other. They get to go to each other classes for an hour and 20 minutes a week in person, right? And so like I started out with like an average of probably 7 kids per class out of, an average of 30 kids per class. We're 25 and 25. And then that has whittled itself down to an average of like 3 or 4. And part of that is just a real simple calculation on the part of a lot of my athletes. If someone in your cohort tests positive for COVID, like someone that you're actually in an in-person class with, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So I've got kids who are like, hey, basketball tries are coming out. I don't want to get put on quarantine because somebody else did something. I'm going to go back to comprehensive distance learning. And I'm like, hey, I understand the calculation. No biggie, right? We're kids who just got freaked out about catching COVID from someone who was making different choices than they were. So we've seen about 30 to 40% of our kids leave the in-person model. So with that, we are at a place in the school year for us. We're about a month away from the end of the school year. So that's a normal. It's getting warmer. It's been actually extra nice this year. We're actually worried about a drought in Oregon because it was so nice in April, which obviously has an impact. So it's been really nice for a while. So we're in that natural, even if everything was normal, right? We all know the end of April, beginning of May, kids kind of hit that hump day, like I just motivation problem, right? Like you see that with your kids, right, Timmy?
Oh yeah.
So it's like it's that whole thing of like summer's close enough that I don't want to do work anymore, but it's far enough away that it doesn't really matter. Um, and so we're in both that time window and just kids who have hit a wall with COVID and all of the restrictions that are in place for the health and safety of our society. So this is not me railing against wearing masks or encouraging people, like everybody should get the vaccine, 100% on board with being as safe as possible, and also understanding that there has been social emotional damage and or frustration that goes with all of those measures, right? Like that's a yes and or both and situation. So with all of that, had progress reports were due for me on Friday night. And to your point, right, they were due at midnight on Friday. And I was that guy that they had to reopen the portal for because I didn't turn them in, because I told 3 students that I would wait until they turned in this thing they told me they were working in on Friday. And then I got home and kind of forgot that I had work that I needed to do because it was a Friday night and I went to be an adult and not have to worry about school and forgot about it. So I submitted them on Sunday and then it wouldn't take them. So like I turned them in late anyways, but something like 45% of my students had turned in 1 or fewer out of the 6 assignments that were in the gradebook.
Mm.
So usually my fail rate, I just talked a bit about this, right? It's usually less than 10%, right? Like my average class has more than 25 kids in it, and I usually don't have more than 2 kids with Fs at the end of my grading periods in my classes. So this is like, what is going on right now, right? So I'm reaching out to everybody to figure out what's like, is anybody else seeing the same thing? What's going on? Schools that are in similar circumstances to ours, and I can't speak to, like, I know your kids have been in person for a while, so I'm hoping for their sake that they got a different result and they're not also in the same. Nope. Okay, they hit the same wall. Okay,
It's been a rough year. I had
okay.
half my class failing first quarter.
Okay, so it's gotten worse as time has gone on, right? Like each like first quarter, worst first quarter I've ever seen, but not right. It was like 9 students, not half of 28 students, right? Like we're literally, I have my third period class has 29 students in it, and 12 kids have turned in 1 or fewer assignments.
Mm.
Mind-boggling to me. So I'm telling you that story because I'm hearing this from multiple teachers. And then I'm on a text thread with friends of mine who are at my school, and they're turning in progress reports, and we're all admitting to the number of Fs that are in our grade book. And one person said, paraphrasing, "I am a failure. I cannot believe how much how poorly I have done for my students, that this is the grade situation that I'm looking at." And a couple other teachers kind of ping-ponged off of that, and it wasn't meant as a pity party at all, right? This wasn't sarcasm. I know these teachers, it's not how it was delivered. It was like a legitimate like gut punch. I am not doing something that I need to do because the results are showing things are not working well. And so my text message back to him was, it is not your fault, and it's not the student's fault.
Right.
These are strange times, to put it in the best light possible, and we all need to give each other, students, teacher, teacher to student, student to teacher, parents to teacher, parent to student, we all need to give each other an enormous amount of grace, not a little bit of grace, an enormous amount of grace, and just kind of figure out what do we do so that we feel comfortable and ready to take the next step. Because my plea is, 1, give everybody some grace as it relates to the academic things in our lives, and wherever you fall in the camp of being more on Tim's side with the late work or my side with the late work and the grade conversation, I would argue none of those arguments make sense right now, right? Because we're in a completely uncharted territory, and we just need to get everybody to a place where we're ready to move forward. And then my second plea with everybody would be, don't make your mission to get back to normal. Make it your mission that when you come out of this and we take our next step, it's a new normal, right? Whether it's you're going to put Super Mario Effect into action in your school, or you're going to make some decisions around how to support the students who the system is not designed to help at your school, or whatever those things are, don't allow yourself to go back to what used to be comfortable. Try and find a new place of what is acceptable and good for you and your students. That would be my second plea. So number 1, give everybody involved in the system or the educational world a lot of grace for this year. And then second, when you're launching into the next year, don't accept going back to normal as the expectation, right? We're going to set up a new normal that's better than the old one.
Growth mindset. Couldn't say it any better. Love it. Well, here's to an abundance of grace. Thanks for closing us out, and we'll see y'all back here next week. Always learning at Peak State.
Make it a great day.